A black hole is a region of space and time where gravity is so powerful that nothing in recorded history has been strong enough to escape it. Similarly to how I can't escape the endless cycle of tall lightning women in gacha games. I can usually handle a bit of midriff, but when it comes to Acheron, I am deranged. But just for this video, I'm gonna try and look at her normally. Not like Black Swan, who tried to invade her brain and ended up getting invaded in bed. Today, I'm gonna go over everything you need to know about Acheron, and wow, that really didn't last very long. My name is Braxophone, and let's talk about Acheron right after I read you this ad. Before we get too far into the video, I wanted to give you all my tanks for your support. I hope you like them. I got them just for you. World of Tanks is a free-to-play team-based action game where you can use over 600 different tanks to claim victory. The combat in World of Tanks is insanely detailed, and with over 600 different tanks to choose from, and different mechanics to make things more skill-based, you have a lot to look forward to. When you engage in a battle, you have to consider tons of things like visibility and range, blocking, armor penetration, and way more stuff. In World of Tanks, you can explore realistic maps and environments in high detail with some of the world's most accurately depicted tank models in any game. And if you want to customize your experience, you can stylize your tanks with different decals, presets, and even custom styles, just to give a little bit more flavor. By downloading World of Tanks now using my link and code COMBAT, you'll get Tier 6 tank Cromwell B, 250,000 credits, and 7 whole days of premium access. You'll also get 3 rental tanks that are all Tier 6, which will massively help you out. For returning players, you can also grab 3 days of premium, a new camo, a 7-day rent premium tank, or 100k credits if you already have it. Make sure to download and register for World of Tanks using the link below. The third banner of 2.1 has arrived, and with it came the Hersher of Alzheimer's. The second I played Acheron, I got thrown into a domain expansion where I was forced to read for 16 hours before I could escape. The second I played Acheron, Acheron uses a unique system for energy that's not actually energy at all. Essentially, she just has this little flower-looking thing that can hold up to 9 petals, or alternatively what they're called is stacks of Slashed Dream. And when she maxes it out, she gets to use the single best-looking ultimate in the entire game, where she stops time to take the enemy's lunch money. But before that, you need to understand how Acheron's talent works. Her talent essentially makes it so that whenever an enemy gets a debuff from any action, Acheron gains a petal towards her ultimate, and the enemy gets a stack of Crimson Knot, which is funny because it's not crimson, it's actually purple or something. They can stack up to 9 per enemy, and the goal is to stack them up on enemies before you use her ultimate, which is pretty easy because every single time you get a stack towards her ultimate, you're applying a Crimson Knot, so it works out. Her ultimate has 3 targeted slashes and a finisher that has an AoE big enough to also finish the player. Each hit of the initial 3 targeted slashes can remove 3 stacks of Crimson Knot, and for every stack that's removed, that slash dishes out more damage. With one of her major traces, she also gains 30% damage bonus per Crimson Knot removed, up to 90% total damage bonus for 3 turns. That trace also increases her finisher's damage. During her ultimate, she can also break any element, including my fucking video game. And to work alongside that mechanic, she shreds enemy resistance until the ultimate ends. The most important thing for Acheron is getting stacks as fast as possible, and putting the not Crimson Knot on enemies in stacks of 3 to maximize damage output. That means you can have 1 enemy with 9, an enemy with 6, and an enemy with 3, or 3 enemies with 3. When an enemy with extra knots dies, the Crimson Knots get transferred to another character, like STDs, so I guess she and Black Swan really do have a lot of the same going for them, aside from Doomed Yuri. Acheron's talent also has 2 major traces tied to it, Ito and Skirk. When the battle starts, Acheron will start with 5 petals of her ultimate, so you'll only need 4 more petals to ult. Right when you enter battle, you can break or debuff enemies as well, and that can make her start with 6. She also has another buff called Quadrivalent Ascendance. Quadratic Asymmetry gives her an extra petal towards her ultimate for every stack she has after using it. Her major trace lets her hold up to 3 stacks of Quintessential Actualization, and her technique also lets her start the fight with 1 stack of x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Acheron also gets a multiplicative damage bonus across her kit if you run multiple Nihility characters. It's a massive damage bonus added for having 2 Nihility other than Acheron, but I'll go a bit more into detail on that in the team section. Lastly, her skill gives her a Slash Dream stack towards her ultimate. Now, something important to know is that that petal is independent of petals from her skill action. You can only get up to 1 petal per action that debuffs, but because her skill states explicitly that it gives Acheron a petal, or a stack of Slash Dream if you want to be technical, if there's another debuff that occurs as a result of a light cone, she can actually get 2 stacks from her skill instead of 1. Not only that, but if you break enemies, you can also get an extra stack that way that doesn't count towards the action. Acheron is like Eula, if Eula ever hit enemies. With the right team comps, you can supercharge her nuke faster than she made Black Swan Spiral, but nothing will be stronger than the blunt end of her sword, except for the sharp end of her sword. Her technique signoras enemies, except at least with Acheron, she still picks up the items and buffs in Simulated Universe. She makes Simulated Universe kind of a joke to farm. However, don't feel pressure to pull for her SU at the moment, since during the livestream they did say they had a plan to make SU faster as is. But do know that if you get a copy of Acheron, she will make farming easier for the time being. Lastly, for talent priority, make sure to focus on her ultimate first, then her skill, and then her talent. Acheron is an emanator of something. Some folks think nihility, Adventuring thinks finality, but I know her true identity. As somebody who's been around since 1.0, Zila has been power crept by the emanator of black shorts. But just because she power crept her wardrobe doesn't mean she uses the same set of relics. Except she does. Or can. Let me explain. Acheron's true best in slot relic is the Pioneer set that gives damage bonus, crit rate, and crit damage against enemies with debuffs on them. For Acheron, who wants to take advantage of debuff-based teams, these buffs are way too good to pass up. With that said though, she can also take advantage of the 4-piece Genius set, especially against quantum weak enemies where she can use the full 20% defense ignore. Genius is good on most DPS for the defense ignore, just in general, but I guess that kind of makes everyone Zealot, not just Acheron. She can also use mixed 2-piece sets of speed and lightning damage and attack, but just know the Pioneer set is going to be best in slot and the quantum set is pretty dang good. For planar sets, you want to use the new Izumo set, which has an insane amount of lore attached to it that I'm sure is really important, but I don't know how to read. Worst case scenario, you can throw on an old set of Inert Salsoto since most of her damage is from her ultimate. For main stats, you want a crit body, speed or attack boots, an attack or lightning sphere, and an attack rope. Now crit is just based off of whatever you need more of, and for boots, speed is going to be the most consistent, but there are situations where attack boots can actually pull ahead just depending on your team and light cone, or if you're playing Sparkle, you definitely want to run attack boots. For her sphere, attack is technically a little better on paper, but the difference is so small that you can just run whichever has the better substats, and the rope is just like, what else are you gonna do? In case you want to see everything in one place, here's her build summary. Make sure to get a good look at it before it disappears among the sea of butterflies and becomes an illusion of the past. By far, the biggest controversy surrounding Acheron is how strong her light cone is. This is the first time since Honkai Impact 3rd where we've seen such a massive damage potential difference between the best free-to-play option and the signature weapon. But luckily, I have a perfect solution for you. It's called Just Win.
Gamble idiots.
By just winning, you can guarantee that you don't lose, because losing's for losers, but you're a winner. For every time you win, every time. We may only be getting 30 pulls this patch, but remember, it only takes 1 pull to get a light cone, and only 7 pulls to E6 Acheron. Winning is recommended by 2 out of 10 guide makers. Just listen to what Sevi has to say.
Ever since I started winning, I haven't lost, and I don't ever want to go back.
Big wins.
Become a winner, just start winning today. Just Winning has a guarantee to make you win unless you're Tectone. Her signature gives her some crit damage and damage bonuses, but it also gives enemies a debuff, which allows Acheron to gain an extra stack towards her ultimate whenever she uses her skill. Other 5-star light cones are great for her, but don't come close to her signature. The next best S1 light cones to use are Incessant Rain, and Patience is all you need just due to the debuffs they can give that help Acheron get stacks faster. But other than that, your best bet is the 4-star Goodnight and Sleep Well. If you don't have that at S5, In the Name of a World is okay, but honestly, the next best bet is S1 Goodnight Sleep Well. If you don't have any of those other options, Fermata is probably your best free-to-play option, especially if you're going to use Black Swan with her. Resolution Shines is a solid Nihility light cone that helps Acheron get ult stacks up a bit sooner, but there's a weird mechanic as of recording this that basically doesn't give you an extra stack for reapplying a 1-turn dodge. So for some reason, if you hit the same enemy twice in a row with Resolution, it might not give the extra stack, making it end up much worse in practice unless you're always in AoE and can juggle applying that stack. It's almost always going to be better to run Resolution on your support. The only thing I can realistically say about Acheron is that unfortunately she's gone the premium route. Nope, not like that. The major downside to all of this is that Nihility doesn't have a lot of carry-style DPS-oriented light cones, and even if a light cone is focused on being a stat stick for a DPS character, it usually doesn't have a debuff like Acheron wants to maximize her stacks. Her damage without her signature light cone isn't terrible, but if you're looking for someone to compete with Jingnu or Dill for the strongest damage dealers, you will need her light cone as things are. In the future, I don't think that 4-star light cones or teammates that improve Acheron's free-to-play friendliness are off the table, but they're not in the game now, and even if they were, they'd probably be terrified of her. Here's some light cone comparisons. Keep in mind that these rankings can change based on your teams. For example, Black Swan wasn't included in the teams for these because she is one of the best zero-cycle clearers, but those aren't the benchmark for the average player. I'll talk about that next in the team section though.
I'm gonna say the A word.
Accuracy. Acheron is probably one of the most restrictive characters in the entirety of Honkai Star Rail, and I'm sorry that is the truth. Now, that is not the permanent truth. They can definitely put more Nihility characters in the game that will help her be more flexible for free-to-play players and just help her run other team comps in general, but at the moment, she is incredibly restrictive. The reason I'm holding out hope, though, is because Qingyuan exists, and every single patch bro has gotten a buff. But anyways, let me show you some of Acheron's team options. First off, Pela and Silverwolf are two of Acheron's best partners just due to the amount of debuffs that they can provide. Now, the downside with Pela is that Pela actually requires this light cone right here. Resolution shines as pearls of sweat. The reason is because Pela doesn't actually get a debuff on her skill or basic attack until about E4, where she can shred enemy ice res. But that's only useful on her skill because her basic attack still does nothing. This light cone effectively lets you use her basic attack and apply a different debuff, which lets Pela be SP neutral while applying a debuff every single turn and giving Acheron a stack every single turn. Silverwolf, however, can apply a debuff with every single hit that she does, so she's chilling. She doesn't need that light cone. But the issue with Silverwolf is that if you're in AoE content, you are going to struggle a little bit more with her SP usage if you try to apply multiple weaknesses to enemies. And if you're not using SP and you're just using Silverwolf basic attack to apply debuffs to enemies, she's fine. Trailblazer is interesting. I think a lot of people don't really use Trailblazer anymore just because we have a lot of sustain options. But the thing that makes Trailblazer stand out is not actually Trailblazer's kit as much as this light cone right here called Trend of the Universal Market. Basically, whenever the wearer is attacked, there's a chance to burn the enemy. And Trailblazer has this unique ability to taunt enemies with her skill. By taunting enemies, you're basically all but guaranteeing that they attack her or him if you're playing Kalis. Sorry, I don't mean to discriminate. What not a ton of people actually know, though, is that Trailblazer's taunt actually applies a debuff to enemies. Taunt is a debuff that you can apply to them, which helps Acheron get her stacks faster, and get the burn debuff applied to enemies. So you can gain stacks on Acheron when it's not even any of your character's turns. Fire Trailblazer also destroys a lot of fire break gauge, so you also have that to look forward to with breaks and dots. But primarily, Fireblazer is just good for the taunt. Beyond these characters, though, you also have other accessible sustains. Gallagher, who I'm gonna actually talk about at a later video, his ultimate applies a debuff that makes you heal whenever you hit enemies, and then he has a follow-up basic attack that also applies another debuff to enemies, meaning that Gallagher, when he uses his ultimate, can basically instantly give Acheron 2 charges towards her ult. Black Swan's unique mechanic is even more sick than that, because Black Swan effectively refreshes her dot every single time the enemy moves. Whenever Arcana resets and dishes out that damage, Black Swan is going to give Acheron another stack. So not only will you get a stack on Acheron every time you attack, but you're also going to get a stack on Acheron every single time the enemy attacks, which is super awesome. Black Swan is one of the best ways to speedrun Acheron to her ultimate. Black Swan also has a little bit of defense shred, which is nice. The only downside to running these two together is that Acheron will absolutely mind Black Swan once the predator, now the victim. Another character you can go ahead and run for your sustainer is Japard. If you give Japard the IRS light cone, he can give debuffs to enemies the same way that Trailblazer can. The downside is that Japard doesn't have a straight up taunt mechanic like Fireblazer, but he is preservation, so he's probably going to take some damage. Japard also has a freeze that he can do with his skill, and if he freezes an enemy, that is also going to be a stack to Acheron. Now this character, this gremlin, is one of the most controversial things that has ever happened to me in a video. Because of Acheron's ability to get a massive damage bonus if she is using 2 Nihilated characters on her team aside from herself, people believe that is the only way to run Acheron, when mathematically, it actually works out to run Sparkle as well. In fact, Sparkle is so incredibly busted that she actually beats out running a second Nihility some of the time. This is because she allows you to run attack boots on Acheron, and with all of her buffs, she ends up making Acheron hit a little bit harder, even if she doesn't get stacks as quickly. But depending on the team comp and your buffs and your builds, she could even get stacks faster. It just really depends on the content. Funny enough, Sparkle and Pela, at least from the calcs that I've seen, ends up being slightly better than running Silverwolf and Pela together, and better damage than running Black Swan and Pela together. Now, the downside to this is that it's not really a 0-cycle team unless you have eidolons on Acheron or you have her light cone. Because without her light cone, the Sparkle Pela difference is not that big and sometimes even falls behind. You need her light cone in this situation to sort of compensate for not getting stacks as fast. But with her light cone, this is a really solid option, and with E2, this is probably one of her strongest teams. Japard can just be a fill, though. He's pretty generic, pretty vanilla. I'm gonna get a lot of hate for saying to run this team, but unironically, if you're not 0-cycling, this team is very, very consistent. You can also run Fushuan as a sustainer, and Pela Black Swan, like I said, is a good combo. But something I wanted to talk about really quick is this team that people keep bringing up about Kafka, Acheron, and Black Swan. I don't know where this info came from, but every person that I've talked to that does calc says that this team is basically bullshit. Like, it's not actually a real team. I tried playing it SP Doko. Like, I don't know where the fuck your SP is gonna go. Maybe this is one of her best teams for 0-cycle clears if you have a Harmony character instead of Fushuan, and then you just throw away your SP on some characters. But keep in mind, the MOC that this was tested on also features a lot of dots. I'm not saying this team is out of the question, but in my testing, this actually didn't feel as good to play, but you can let me know down in the comments what you think. Or don't, because I hate when people disagree with me. This team do be kind of mother though. Wait, get out of here, Fushuan. This team do be kind of mother though. And lastly, I want to talk about the zero cycling option that you have. In my opinion, this is going to be one of the best ones. If you're zero cycling, you don't necessarily need a sustainer as much as you would if you were just going for consistent damage that was going to work every single time. Welt is a bit of a weird scenario because he isn't as great at solo sustaining for really long periods of time, but he can get away with it in certain situations, especially if the enemy is weak to imaginary. Welt is an annihilated character and Pela is an annihilated character, so you're getting defense shred from Pela, you're getting Welt, who is going to apply speed debuffs to the enemies, which is going to give Acheron more stacks, and Welt has his own imprison thing, which is a separate action, which is also more stacks for Acheron. You get the full 160 multiplier, and you can run Sparkle as an extra harmony character to further boost Acheron's damage. Now, if you have E2 Acheron, you can even replace Welt with like probably another harmony, right? But this team is very solid for zero cycling. Acheron is a front-loaded nuke, and with characters that can apply debuffs every single turn, and with Sparkle, it's a pretty consistent way to get really fast clears. The only downside is that if one character gets hit over and over and over, you have to hit the reset button. That is well sustained in a nutshell. One character that I think a lot of people are also underrating is Asta. Now, I don't mean Asta specifically in this team, but Asta is a character that can give you team-wide speed buffs and team-wide attack buffs, and if you're playing characters like Black Swan with Acheron, for example, getting a faster Black Swan with more attack means that her dots are going to deal a lot more damage. She's going to be able to dish out debuffs more times, and if you go SP neutral on Asta, you can actually apply a dot with Asta's basic attack as well, meaning that you can apply a ton of debuffs, get a bunch of attack buffs, and go very, very fast. Asta's definitely going to be an underrated teammate. If you don't have E2, it's a little awkward to replace another Diality with her. However, if you are zero cycling, she could be worth using, and if you have E2, she's definitely worth using. The very last, like actually last character I want to talk about is Streamer. I'm a stream. Gwenifin is actually an okay unit to use here, but she does end up being on the lower end of damage output for Acheron, mostly because her vulnerability, while very helpful, is not going to be able to match the power of Pela or some of the other characters that can battery Acheron. Gwenifin has plenty of debuffs, but her personal damage also falls kind of short, and because her personal damage is falling short, because she's not as efficient as Black Swan, because she's not as versatile as Silverwolf, and because she's not Elation, she does end up falling a little bit short, but she is usable in Acheron teams.
As if it wasn't bad enough for free-to-play players that her Lycomb was so strong, the Hersher of Dementia also has busted eidolons. For example, her E1 increases her crit rate by 18% against debuff enemies, but that basically just means all the time. Her second eidolon is pretty busted though, because it lets you be so much more flexible with her teams. Her E2 makes it so that she only needs one Nihility character other than herself to max out her talent buff. And on top of that, she gains one stack towards her ult and one not red not stack on an enemy at the start of every one of her turns. This makes it so that you can run one Harmony and one Nihility character and return to Sparkle Jail. And you can do all of that without missing out on her 160 multiplier. E3 is an ult and a basic attack level up, and E4 gives enemies an ult damage vulnerability, which increases the amount of ult damage they'll take across all of your characters. Vulnerability is actually different from damage bonus, and this 8% is stronger than it looks. E5 is a skill and talent level up, and E6 makes it so that I will literally never pull anyone else ever again, unless they do a fake collab. It increases Acheron's res pen by an extra 20% on ult damage, but the kicker is that it also makes her basic attack and skill dish out ult damage as well. It also makes it so that basic attacks and skills from Acheron can reduce enemy toughness no matter what type the enemy is. Basically, you beat the game. Now, between her eidolons and her light cone, if you were to equalize her stats to favor that 18% crit rate from her E1, the difference in damage would actually be bigger than her light cone over a long fight. However, since her light cone lets her front load her damage more, and because there are crit rate buffers in the game, it makes way more sense to go for her light cone. Here's an eidolon comparison though, just for you to use responsibly and make sure not to dump all of your grocery budget on for the month. Acheron is an insane unit for a price. Let me know who you think the most underrated band is, and I forgot what I was going to say next.